Hello and welcome to Jason's Macintosh Museum. I'm Jason, your host, and today we're looking at a Macintosh Performa 5300 Director's Edition from 1995. Now, for those of you who may not know what a Macintosh Performa is, let me give you a little bit of background. Basically, in the early 1990s, Apple were very strong in the educational market with their Macintosh systems, and they were gaining more widespread acceptance in the business community as well. But what they found is that they weren't very popular as home PCs. So what Apple did was they created a line of systems badged specifically as Macintosh Performa. And these systems were designed to be sold for home use. The theory behind it was that they would take existing models of Macintosh, rebadge them, and bundle different software with them to make them more useful in the home environment. And so what you had was a whole line of Macintosh machines that looked just like a regular Macintosh model, but were badged as Macintosh Performa, rather than Power Macintosh or LC or Classic. And this is one of them. This particular model is the Macintosh Performa 5300. And it is basically identical to the Power Macintosh 5300. The only difference between them is the badge and most likely the software that would have been sold or bundled with the machine when it was new. Now, as you can see, this particular model, the 5300, is an all-in-one system. So all the components are integrated into the system casing. And you could say that the 5300 really was the successor to the older LC 500 series of machines, the 520, 550, and 575 and 580, which also had an integrated monitor. This version, though, of course, has a PowerPC chip and a larger internal monitor. However, this series of Macintosh, the 5200, 5260, 5300, has really become quite infamous in that a lot of people believe that these versions of the Mac have probably the worst or the most compromised hardware design of any Macintosh ever made. So you may ask, well, what did they actually do wrong with this machine? Why was it so badly compromised, and what was the reason for that? Well, it all comes down to what Apple did a lot of in the early to mid-1990s, and that was cost cutting. Because by the mid-90s, Apple were really trying hard to reduce the cost of their machines, primarily to compete with, and certainly in terms of the Performa, compete with machines such as the IBM PS1 and Aptiva, which were also designed for use in the home. So when it came time to make a PowerPC all-in-one machine that was more or less going to be sold either to educational institutions or to the home market, Apple realized that the price point was very important. And so they set about creating this machine in really the cheapest way possible. So what Apple basically did with this machine is, rather than engineering a new logic board for it that took advantage or took full advantage of the PowerPC chip that was in use at the time, they decided to more or less take one of their earlier logic board designs that was originally built around the 68040 CPU, install a PowerPC chip into it, and basically perform a lot of software and hardware hacks to make it all work. So Apple basically took the logic board they were using out of the Quadra 630, or LC 630, which of course used a Motorola 68040 CPU. Now that was fine. The board was designed for that CPU and it worked very, very well. But Apple decided to adapt that board to use the PowerPC chip. Now, there were several problems with doing this. Crucially, the PowerPC is a 64-bit CPU with a 64-bit data bus, but the 68040 is a 32-bit CPU with a 32-bit data bus. And as a result, you basically have the PowerPC chip working on that board in 32-bit mode. In other words, it only has a 32-bit data bus to the outside world, and in particular to the memory. And that impacted performance significantly when compared with a proper PowerPC system. But that was only the beginning of the problems. The next major issue was down to the modem ports on this machine, because remember, of course, back in the day when this machine was new, people were using dial-up modems to get onto the internet and do other things. But again, to save money, Apple did not include hardware handshaking capabilities on the modem ports for this machine. I think the idea behind it was that if you wanted a modem, you would install one into the Comm slot on the board, but a lot of people had external hardware modems, and if you tried to use one with this machine, you wouldn't get hardware handshaking, and that severely limited the throughput, or the data throughput speed, that you could get through the serial port. So that was another big problem. But there are a lot of other little problems, and they really come down to the fact that because the motherboard, or the logic board for this machine, was based on the LC630 or the Quadra 630, all of the other components are designed to work on a 32-bit bus. So Apple had to basically split the data bus for the PowerPC chip in two to give all of the other controllers the ability to talk on a 32-bit bus to the rest of the system. And what it also meant was that there was no way that either the IDE controller, the Scuzzy controller, the video controller could access memory without going through the CPU. And that problem was compounded by the fact that because the PowerPC chip was running on a 32-bit data bus, it took twice as many CPU cycles to read and write from memory, because you had to basically read 32 bits of memory and then read the second 32 bits of memory. You couldn't read all 64 bits in a single pass. Now, the only advantage of that was that you could install 72-pin SIM modules in this machine one at a time. You didn't have to install them as a matched pair as you did in other PowerPC models. But the impact on performance was catastrophic as a result. And there were even some system stability problems. When these machines first came out, apparently they had to be recalled because there were several bugs in the system ROM which caused severe instability problems. And the list just goes on and on and on. I should also mention, in fact, that the IDE controller for this machine was only on an 8-bit data bus, which severely impacted the performance of the hard disk. So really, these machines were extremely compromised, all because Apple wanted us to save a few dollars. But it meant that the overall performance of these machines was nowhere near what it could have been. In fact, even though this particular machine has a 100 megahertz PowerPC 603E CPU, its performance is basically comparable to an 80 or 75 megahertz PowerPC 601 when running on a proper PowerPC system, such as the old Macintosh or Power Macintosh 7100. So they may have been cheap, but they were certainly nasty. And the other area, in fact, where costs were cut was in the area of the screen itself. Prior LC500 series models, which had a built-in screen, had a smaller, albeit, Sony Trinitron CRT, which, if you know the Trinitron, was very bright and very crisp. But by the time Apple launched the 5300 or 5200 series machines, they'd gone to a much cheaper shadow mask CRT, which, as you can see, has notable curvature, both horizontally and vertically. In fact, when you're using it, it's a bit like looking at a goldfish bowl. It's that bad. So the whole machine was cheap. And to make matters even worse, these machines specifically are probably the worst offenders when it comes to the case plastics becoming brittle over time. So these machines specifically, as they age, the case plastics simply, if you apply too much force to them, they will simply snap. And that becomes a big problem when you try and remove some of the covers for this machine, as I'll show you when we disassemble it. So you have to be very, very careful because the plastics will simply snap on you. So all in all, not Apple's best effort. And again, many people believe it was one of the worst models of Macintosh ever made. So, but having said that, this one is a special version. It is actually called the Director's Edition. And that was basically a special edition of the 5300 that was fitted with a video capture card and an analog TV tuner card, in addition to having special video editing software included as well. But other than that, it was nothing more than a standard 5300, which meant you got all the problems with the 5300. Now, despite all the problems that the 5300 has in terms of its hardware, it wasn't actually the worst of the bunch. That honour, I think, belongs to the original model that was released in this series, the 5200, which looks just like this, but it has a 75 MHz PowerPC 603 CPU in it. Now, the problem that machine had was basically down to the fact that it used a Motorola PowerPC 603 CPU rather than a 603E. The difference between the two chips was mainly, apart from the clock speed, it was that the 603E had a much larger level 1 cache, and that was important when it was being used in a Macintosh. The reason behind that is that when Apple started building PowerPC-based systems, of course, they had to be able to run older software that was compiled for the 68K series of CPUs that Apple had used up to that point. Now, the way they did that was they basically emulated a 68040 CPU inside the chip and ran that sort of software as an under emulation. Now, that worked fine, except that the emulation system that they used was very dependent, in terms of its performance, was very dependent on the size of the level 1 cache in the CPU. And it turns out that the level 1 cache in the PowerPC 603 chip wasn't big enough to have the emulation run at a decent speed. So what you found is that on systems that had a PowerPC 603 chip, performance when running 68K code was far worse than you would have if you were running it on a genuine 68K CPU, even though it might have had a much lower clock speed. So, in addition to all the problems that the 5200 series had, that was another one that it had. Thankfully, by the time they released the 5300 series, Apple had moved to the PowerPC 603E chip, which had a much larger level 1 cache, and the performance problems with emulating 68K code weren't really as apparent. But unfortunately, the overall system performance was still lousy due to all the other issues that I mentioned. So, some specifications on the Performa 5300. It was launched in August of 1995 and was discontinued in March of 1997. This version has a 100 MHz PowerPC 603E CPU. It has 4 MB of memory on board, expandable up to 68 MB with 1 or 2 72-pin SIMs. It has a LC Comm slot, and it also has a video slot for a video capture card, which this one happens to have. And I believe, well, the hard disks were IDE hard disks, and I believe you could have either a 500 MB or 800 MB hard disk. I'm actually not quite sure, but we'll find out what sort of hard disk this one has. And the internal monitor was a 15-inch CRT monitor, albeit a very rounded shadow mask CRT, which could run up to 832 by 624 resolution at 8-bit colour. You also got a built-in, I think it was a 4X CD-ROM and a 1.4 MB Apple SuperDrive. So, that's really all there is to say about the Macintosh Performa 5300. So now, we'll take a closer look at it. Here's the front view of the Macintosh Performa 5300. And as you can see, it's actually quite a very attractive and well-designed all-in-one system. It's just a shame about the hardware inside. So, starting from the top, we've got the special Director's Edition tag up here, which, as I mentioned, indicates that this machine was fitted with a analog TV tuner card and a video capture card as standard, along with special video editing software. And we've got an internal microphone up here. And then below that we have the 15-inch CRT, and it might not be that apparent looking at it through the camera, but the screen definitely has quite significant curvature both horizontally and vertically, and I must admit the quality of the image is not very good, especially when compared with the older Trinitron displays that Apple used. So we've got the Apple logo down here. Then below that we have the left-hand speaker. Here is the built-in, I think it's a quad-speed tray-loading CD-ROM. The 1.4 megabyte manual inject SuperDrive is here. So there's the right-hand speaker. Then below that we've got a headphone jack. And we have an IR receiver window, because some versions of these Macintosh Performers could be fitted with the TV tuner card, and the TV tuner card usually came with a remote control, which unfortunately I don't have for this, but anyhow, that would be used with the remote control. We've got the screen brightness and volume controls here, and there's the Macintosh Performa 5300 name tag and the PowerPC name tag there. And just down the bottom is the, is the power LED. So that's the front view. Now, there's not much to look at on the side, so we'll go straight to the back. So here's the rear view of the Performa 5300, and from the top we've got some cooling vents here, and then off to the right we've got adjustments for the screen positioning, horizontal and vertical position. But there are other adjustments you can make, but you have to actually take the back cover off in order to get to them. And below that we've got all the various certifications here. And then here we have the manufacturing and serial number tag, October of 1995 is when this was manufactured, and SG would indicate that it was made in Singapore. Here's the model information tag, model number M3046. Over here we have the power inlet and main power switch. Now this Macintosh does support soft power, but they included, a bit like the Color Classic, they included a hardware or a hard power switch on the back as well. And then down below that you can see that the design of the logic board is a bit like that of the LC630 or the Color Classic, in that the board is designed to slide out from the back. So there's a plastic cover, as you can see, that covers the back of the logic board. So the ports, these are the ports for the video capture card. We've got S-video and composite video and analog audio. Now this is the blanking plate. I believe that's, focus, camera's going nuts, focus. That I believe is the blanking plate when you're using a, I think it's when you're using a, not sure in fact what's meant to go there. I'll have to look that up, I think. I'm not quite sure what goes there. But the Comm slot is over here. There's an internal modem installed in this one. And I think this is the blanking plate if you're using the LC PDS slot. Then we've got the various ports, audio out, microphone in, external SCSI, printer and modem ports with no hardware handshaking, and single ADB. And right down at the bottom we have the analog antenna input for the TV tuner card. Okay, so that's our look at the outside of the Macintosh Performa 5300. So now we will take it apart. Okay, now the first thing we'll do to take this apart is we'll take out the logic board, which is quite easy to do. Just like machines such as the Color Classic and LC630, the logic board is designed to slide out from the back. So the first step is to take off this plastic cover. Now there are two tabs you have to release in order to remove this cover, and you can feel them just underneath the panel. They actually protrude down slightly. But you have to be very careful because, as I mentioned, this model of Macintosh, especially when it's as old as it is, has very brittle case plastics. So if you're not careful, you can snap those tabs right off. So you have to reach underneath and pull the tabs down while pulling out on the cover. And when you feel them release, the bottom of the cover will release and you can remove the logic board cover. So now we have the back of the logic board. Just tilt this like this. So we have the logic board here and we can pull it straight out, and Apple actually give you a very neat little pop-out handle. You can see it just here. If I push down on this, you can see the little handle pops out and you can actually very gently pull on it, or rocking back and forth, to pull the logic board out. And there it is. Now what we can do is we can take out the TV tuner card down here. One screw is holding it in, so we'll quickly remove that. Now the card should slide out of the rails, but we have to unhook this connector here to remove it. So that's the TV tuner card out. Now what we can do is take out the hard disk, which lives just down here. So unhook the data and power connectors from it, put them aside. And now with the hard disk, there is a tab. Let's move that out of the way. There is a tab down here you have to lift up on while pulling the drive back. And again, don't apply too much force to the tab because you will snap it off. So I think what I'll do is I'll get, let's see, have I got some pliers here? No, I don't think I do. Let me see if I can do this without breaking anything. Might actually just try and push the drive back while I... You really need a pair of pliers to do this. And I thought I had some. Oh, here we go, I do have some. So if I very carefully, now the tab has been released, if I very carefully pull back on it, I say very carefully, otherwise I will break it. In fact, I can actually hear the plastic cracking when I do that. So I may have to think of an alternative here, because I do not want to break this tab. Unless I actually pull on the drive itself very carefully. Just rock it back and forth. That's all I need to do, just very, very carefully, just to get it clear of the system. Oh, now it appears to have stuck. Why has it stuck? Oh, yeah, I've got it part of the way out, but now it's... Oh, it's up. Now you see, even doing that, I chipped a tiny bit of plastic off the tab. These plastics are so brittle. Now I should be able to actually just get hold of the drive and pull it out, but it's putting up a fight. I may have to spend a bit of time to do this carefully. So I think we'll cut to the next scene where I actually managed to get the drive out. Okay, well, after a bit of careful pulling and tugging, I managed to get the drive out far enough where I can remove it. So there's the drive that is in the machine. I'm not sure if that's the original drive, mind you, but when that's the disk, we'll take a closer look at that later on. Okay, so from the back, there's not much else that you can remove. So we'll spin this around and we'll now take the components we can take out of the front. So from the front, we can remove this front cover. And there are two tabs. Again, if you feel them, they're just underneath. One here, one over here. And again, extremely brittle plastic. Now, let's see if I can get these tabs loose. You pull down on them carefully without breaking them. You can actually hear the plastic. Ooh, oh, okay, that one is loose. Let's see if we can get this one loose. Oh, not quite. You've got to be so careful. Oh, and that's it. Right, the cover is now loose. Now, it looks like the shield has come off there. That's supposed to sit inside the inside there. But anyhow, the cover is loose, and you can see the tabs I'm referring to are on the bottom here. These two tabs, and again, if you apply too much force on them, they'll snap clean off. But anyway, the front cover is now off. Now we can take out the CD-ROM. Now, in fact, this one I've already broken the tab here, obviously trying to get it out at some point in the past. But let's see if we can very carefully lift up on this tab. I might just use a screwdriver to wedge it up. And now, I might use a pair of pliers to try and pull on it. So this tab, once you lift it up, you should be able to then pull. Oop, you should be able to pull on the drive to remove it. But it's very tricky when you're fighting these very brittle case plastics. So I might actually try to get the pliers up there. So I can grab onto that one and lift up with that one. Oh, not quite. So I have to get the tab up high enough that it clears the... This is not working terribly well. Oh dear, let's keep going. Oh, now, there it goes. See, I've just broken that bit off. These plastics are unbelievably brittle. Oh well, I'll get this out one way or the other. So let's just, I might actually have to use another screwdriver to lever the drive out from the side. Oh dear, this is not working. This is not working. If I leave it like that, maybe. At least now I've moved it far forward enough that I think I've got the tab released all the way. So I should be able to get the drive out if I carefully... there it goes. So you can see as well how much the front of the drive has yellowed over time. But there we go. That's now out. Good. So the CD-ROM is now out. Now the floppy drive is next. Now I believe to take that out, you simply, again, lift up on this tab and pull. Let's try and do this without breaking anything. Oh, there we go, that comes out. So that's the floppy drive and the cable. Disconnect the cable before we pull it all the way out. There's the floppy drive. And we can also take out the board here with the front panel controls and headphone jack. I think you just grab on that and give it a bit of a tug, rock it out, and unplug the connector, like that. Now, I believe that's really all we can do in terms of the front panel, so the next step will be to remove the back cover so we can see inside. So let me get this repositioned and I'll be right back. Okay, so to take the back cover off, we have to remove, I believe it's 4 screws, if I remember correctly. No, there's actually 6, I think. 3 on each side behind these little covers. One here, and then one down underneath. Now to pop these covers off, I need a very thin flathead screwdriver. So just get in behind here and carefully pop the cover off. Same with this one. And that should reveal the screw behind it, and it does. And these screws are in fact the same Torx bits you find on the compact Macintosh systems. So let's see if I've got my Torx driver here, which I do. So we'll take these ones out, and the one at the very bottom, which does not have a cover on it. Now, same for the other side. Okay, so it's actually missing one of the covers. Huh. Let's pop that off. Oops. Oh, there it goes. Okay, and take screws out. Oh, lost that one. And the one at the bottom. Okay. So at this point, you can see the cover has already started to separate. So what we can do is very carefully pull back on the cover, and it slides right off. So, in fact, the front cover is also now loose as a result, as you can see. So you can actually pull the front cover off, but you have to unhook a couple of cables first. There's the cable for the internal microphone that we have to unplug up here, just very carefully unplug that. And obviously be careful what you touch inside here. I've already discharged the CRT on this one, so it's fine. And you've also got to unplug some cables down here. You can see the cables here for the speakers, and they go up just up in here. So just carefully unplug that, and you can now remove the front cover. Just be very careful with that. There we are. So there's the front cover removed. Okay, so what we now have is basically all of the internal power supply circuitry and the CRT. Now it's all protected by these covers, which you can remove just by undoing a few screws, but basically what we have inside, just get you a better angle. So we've got the CRT up here, we've got the CRT analog board on this side, we've got the flyback transformer here with the focus and brightness controls, and on this side we have the power supply board. So if you wanted to take this all apart, you could, but it's quite a difficult procedure, so I would recommend reading the Apple service manual for that one. And that's really all there is to it. So that's pretty much all we can take apart on this one. So yes, I think that's about it. So I'll just note the CRT is actually a Toshiba CRT. You can see it just there. That little label there. Oh, which is of course, well, that's it, Toshiba. There we go. So it's certainly not the best CRT they've used, but obviously a much cheaper alternative to the Sony Trinitron. Right. Okay. Right. Well, that's about it. Okay, so that's the Macintosh Performa 5300 disassembled, well, partially. So what we'll do now is have a closer look at some of the components. Here is the logic board out of the Performa 5300, and if you've watched my video on the LC630, you'll notice that this motherboard looks very, very similar. And as I mentioned, that's no coincidence, because Apple basically took the LC630 logic board, adapted it for a PowerPC chip, and ran with that. And so really the only real difference in terms of the board's layout is that there's a PowerPC chip situated where the 68040 chip would normally be. So let's have a look from the top, and we've got all the ports up the top, of course, and we've got the tag Apple Computer, copyright 1994, 1995. I think that might be the sound chip, if I remember correctly. We've got the two 72-pin Dram Sim slots, and as I mentioned, you can actually populate these one at a time. Because the system is still running on a 32-bit memory bus, you don't have to have matched pairs of these SIM modules. And moving across from there, we've got a ROM / level 2 cache slot, which on this system is required in terms of you have to put a ROM SIM in there, which I'll show you in a moment. And then, where do we go from here? Well, here's the main CPU. So this is a Motorola PowerPC 603E. If you can read it there, running at 100 megahertz. Now, normally this would have a heatsink on it, but I've taken it off just to show you the CPU. And then we have the first of the glue logic chips, this one here, which, as I mentioned in the LC630 video, these newer boards have 2 or 3 or 4 glue logic chips that themselves handle a whole variety of system functions. So between them, these glue logic chips control video, SCSI, IDE, memory, and so on. So there's the first one there. Here's the LC processor direct slot. Another glue logic chip over there. On the end we have the Comm slot, which is where you would normally put a modem. Then below that we have the space where the battery would normally go. And just like the LC630, these 52 and 5300 series Macs use a 4.5 volt cube style battery that looks like that. Oops, and there goes the board. I'll just put that over here so you can see what it looks like. That's the type of battery that would normally go into the system. And just like the older 3.6 volt lithium batteries, these 4.5 volt alkalines can and do leak. So if you have one, take it off the board. There's normally a Velcro style pad that's glued onto the board that the battery sits on, which I've taken off. And there's the battery connector over there. Now, I believe that's the video memory, which is not expandable, incidentally. There's the CUDA chip up above that controls ADB and the real-time clock and parameter RAM, and the reset button for it is just there. Another glue logic chip down there. There's the video out. Yes, the video out port, which is, I think, what the unused blanking plate on the back of the machine would be for if you had installed a card into that. Another glue logic chip here. And I think that's about it. Oh, here is the video in slot, which is occupied in this case by the video capture card. And the edge connector down at the bottom. So that's about it. So that's a logic board out of the Macintosh Performa 5300. So now we'll have a quick look at the other cards in the system. Okay, so here is the video in card, or the video capture card, out of the 5300. And like most capture cards of its era, it used a Philips SAA series chip to handle the capturing and possibly hardware compression. Not sure about that. But other than that, you've got the slot connector there. Not sure what that connector was for, to be honest. It may have been used depending on what type of Mac it was installed in, but it's not connected up on the 5300. So there's the part number there. And that's about it. You've got all the ports here. You've got S-video, composite input, composite video input, and analog left and right audio. So that's about it. Oh, there's another Philips chip there, a TDA chip, whatever that's for. So there's the video capture card. Now we'll have a quick look, as I switch these over, at the TV tuner card, which unfortunately is useless nowadays because, like every other country in the world pretty much, Australia has switched off its analog TV service. So you'd have to use a converter to run this. So this is a standard analog TV tuner, which I've got upside down. Let me just flip that. There we go. So this is the Apple computer, part number 8200577. So the actual tuner itself is within this little silver box here. Now, I'm not sure what hyperband ready means. It may mean that it's actually able to tune into cable TV. I'm not quite sure about that, but either way, it's pretty much useless now. So some other Philips chips here, and that's about it. And the only port you have is the connector for the aerial. But hopefully when I demonstrate this machine, I may find a way to actually test and demonstrate this particular card. So we'll find out. Next up is the modem card, which is actually looks to be identical to the one that was in the LC630. So as you can see, it's a Rockwell chipset, 28.8 modem, I think. RC288 DPI, and yep, V34. So that's just a regular hardware modem. But of course, on a machine like the 5300, it was crucial because, as I mentioned, you couldn't use hardware handshaking if you hooked up an external modem to the external modem port. So you had to use one of these instead if you wanted decent performance. And we'll have a quick look at the ROM and level 2 cache module. So that side, we have the level 2 cache for the system. Not sure how much it is actually. I think it's probably about maybe 64K or 128K. I'm not quite sure actually, but there's the cache. And on the other side, we have the ROM chips. So, as I said, this model of Macintosh does not have its ROM on board. It's installed as part of a module. Okay, well that's the various expansion cards and modules. So let's look at the drives now, and we'll start with the CD-ROM. Okay, so here is the CD-ROM out of the Performa 5300, and this one, just like other models of Macintosh, is a tray loading. I think it's a Matsushita or Matsushita. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but or Panasonic, in other words. Tray loading drive, but this one is a quad speed drive, because if we look at the label, we see that it is an Apple CD-600i, which means that it's a quad speed CD-ROM. Class 1 laser product. So on the back we've got the standard Scuzzy connectors. Actually, is it Scuzzy? Yes, it is, because Apple hadn't yet used IDE CD-ROMs in their machines. So that's the Scuzzy connector there, power in, focus, and Scuzzy ID settings, termination, and audio. And notice, like the old C630, the CD-ROM uses these edge connector cards that you have to plug in. So obviously, you need to keep that in mind if you're using this in a machine of this type. Now let's also have a quick look at the hard disk. Okay, so here is the hard disk out of the Performa 5300. Now, I'm not really sure if it's the original drive, because I believe by this time Apple were not always putting their logo onto the drives to indicate that it's a factory OEM part. But anyhow, this one is probably about the right age and capacity. So it's a Comm CFS 425A. So I believe this one was, I think it was 2 platters for 420 megabytes of unformatted capacity. So that's the front of the drive. And on the back, oh, let me take off the back plate quickly and we'll have a look at the controller. Okay, so here's the controller of the drive. So standard IDE, you've got the various controller chips there, Cirrus Logic, ST, Winbond, NCA, all sorts of different manufacturers here. And of course the ROM chip there. And the jumper settings for master and slave down here. So that's the hard disk out of the 5300. So that's really about it. So that concludes our look at the Macintosh Performa 5300. So in part 2, of course, I'll reassemble the 5300, start it up, and as always, show a couple of old Macintosh games. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for part 2.